I'm back. I've been forced out of water once again. You get to see this fish flop around for the next 35 minutes. I actually do really like preaching. It's just not the water that I swim in. If you know me, my name is Josh. I am a pastor here. I'm also a counselor and a therapist, which means that most of the work that I do has to do with the human heart. What drives us, what motivates us, what we struggle with. And I wonder if I could begin today. I want to begin today by talking about the relationship that the human heart has, that your heart has, that my heart has, with money. You're already in the seats, you can't leave. If you know the name Rockefeller, which is, of course, a very well-known American name, the reason you know it is because he's one of the wealthiest Americans whoever was here. He was actually the first billionaire in the world, and for a time he was the most wealthy person in the entire world, which means he was revered, he was coveted, he was seen as the most fortunate of men. Okay, and because of that, he received a lot of attention, and you might remember that famously he was asked by a journalist at one time, how much money is enough money? Does anyone remember what he said? Just a little bit more. Now money, we know money is one of the greatest drivers of human behavior, but it's also one of the greatest drivers of human anxiety. Just last year, the APA conducted this big survey in 2023, asking the question, what drives the most human anxiety for Americans? What is the thing that we worry about the most? And it would be unsurprising to you to hear that the clear winner was money. 9 out of 10 Americans said, this is the thing that I worry about the most. This is the thing I have the most anxiety toward, is money. Economic dips of the past have represented huge moments, not just for our nation, but for individuals, things like the Great Depression, and more recently, the Great Recession of 2008, which caused people not just to lose their jobs, but forced people into an absolute existential crisis as they saw revealed what was their relationship, their heart's relationship with money. Now, just a few years ago, I got to be at the epicenter of this event when we were in New York City. We were in New York City, a couple of us reached staff persons. We weren't there for Wall Street, but we happened to be right down the road. The reason we were on that trip is because we were thinking about starting a counseling center. We wanted to do it really well. And so we had researched these churches that had done this really well. And we had a really unique mission, right? We wanted to have a counseling center that could be outward facing, that could serve our whole community, people who are not Christians, and yet somehow still hold Jesus in the room. And that's a very unique thing, not a very popular thing in the field that I'm in. So we went and visited all these places. And the last place we ended was New York City, specifically in Manhattan, because we went to Redeemer Presbyterian. P.S. That trip was a total success because that was the first time that I got to witness Dan Chalapali do karaoke. I have videos. I'm just not that. You know what? I have videos, but you guys don't deserve them because last year we had a karaoke meetup. And there were not enough RSVPs, and it got canceled, and that's on you. Because you missed out, because Dan was ready to go, okay? And when Dan does karaoke, he doesn't do what I do. He doesn't choose like a pop hit. He doesn't do Michael Jackson or JT. He chooses like Led Zeppelin Deep Track, which he did, or Phil Collins Deep Track. Like he doesn't want anyone in the room to sing with him. He doesn't want them to know the words. He wants the stage. You'll also notice that this was in May and there's Christmas lights, so it's a really reputable institution that we're in here. You totally missed out. But we were in New York City, which was the epicenter of the 2008 Great Recession. And if you know what happened there, essentially, Lehman Brothers, this one of the 4 biggest financial institutions in the US, declared bankruptcy after giving out loans they should not have gave out. And what happened next was a cascading effect of more bankruptcies that led to the biggest dip we've had economically since the Great Depression. But like the Great Depression, it resulted in this huge surge of suicides. First at the highest level, these people that were bearing the pressure from stockholders and who had made some big mistakes, but not just them, everyday Americans. Hundreds of thousands of people lost their jobs. Lots of people lost their homes. And anyone who had an investment in one of these institutions pretty much lost it completely overnight. And so for many people, it didn't just represent a life change. Oh, now I have to dig out. Oh, now, wow, okay, now this is going to be a hard couple years. It was a complete existential crisis. And I think we can confidently say that it was their hope, that in some way, their very existence, their very sense of purpose, their very sense of fulfillment was tied up with their money. And so when it was gone, they were gone. Now, there were other people during that time that had a totally different response. And as documented, they're not as well known. But at that time, there was a well-known pastor who met with a guy named Bill who had lost his home. He had lost everything. But this is what Bill said, because 3 years prior, he had become a Christian, and it changed his relationship with money. This is what he said in that time when he had lost everything. If this economic meltdown and the loss of my assets had happened 3 years ago, I don't know how I could have faced it. I don't know how I would have kept going. But today I can honestly tell you that I feel just as secure without my money as when I had it. And I'm living the happiest days of my life despite it. Another woman had a similar experience. She had been known over many years for giving really large donations to Christian organizations. She had made a ton of money in the financial world, and in the course of a single day in September 2008, her whole field was devastated, including her job and her money. And on the day she lost everything, this is what a close source, a friend, said that she said. Today, my life has changed in a day. I will likely make 10%, maybe 5% of what I used to make. I'm going to have to change everything in my life. What I do, where I live, how I live my life. This is the greatest loss of career I will ever face. But then she said, but I'm kind of excited. Because in the past, I had money, but I had no time. But now I'll have time. And I've always wanted to serve my church. I wonder what it will be like to be trained to serve instead of just give. Really different response. Why weren't these two killing themselves like their friends were doing? Or in deep despair, an existential crisis? What was different about their hearts, and specifically their relationship to this thing of wealth? That's what I want to talk about in the passage today. We are studying the book of Genesis. So we went back to the beginning, the very beginning, the book of Genesis, to see what is our story, what is God's story. And we have just entered the life of Abram, this character, who didn't know God. Abram worshiped pagan gods. God comes to him, breaks into his life, pursues him, not because he's great, but because God had love for him and had a plan for him. And he gives him a call and a promise, which we're going to talk about. But that was last week. Last week was chapter 12. Rob got like one of the biggest chapters of scripture. He's so lucky. Because there's a big promise that God made, including he told Abram, who's very old, you're gonna have children, and your children will be so great that they will number as the dust on the earth, right? Which is nuts. He's really old. It'd be like if you went to your great grandma and you're like, you're gonna have a baby. You should do that. Right? That's what it was like. It was bonkers. And today we get introduced to another character in a totally different direction. So we get introduced to the character of Lot. And you'll see over and over again, these two characters are going to be contrasted from one another, these two men. So this morning I want to talk about just three things pretty quick. First is I want to talk about the disordered love of Lot. 2, the well-ordered love of Abram. And then 3, I want to talk about the order and reordering of our own loves. Let's read in Genesis 13. Abram was very rich in livestock, silver and gold. He went by stages from the Negev to Bethel, to the place between Bethel and Ai where his tent had formerly been, to the site where he had built the altar. And Abram called on the name of the Lord there. Now Lot, who was traveling with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents, but the land was unable to support them as long as they stayed together, for they had so many possessions that they could not stay together, and there was quarreling between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. At that time, the Canaanites and Perizzites were living in the land. So Lot is moving about with Abram, and they get to this point that they have a lot. They've been financially growing to a point that cannot sustain them both. They're both wealthy. You catch that. They're both very wealthy here. And when nomadic people get wealthy, their bank account doesn't just increase, they expand. Their livestock get bigger, their tents get bigger, the amount of men serving them gets bigger. And they reach this point that there's actually conflict between both of their groups of men. Now they came to this place called Canaan, right? They're in Canaan, because if you remember last chapter, this is the place that God told Abram to remain. He said, I'm gonna give you this land, and I will give you that great family I talked about, but you need to remain here, and I will give it to you. I will bless you here, all right? But they realized that their financial growth had totally reached its max, okay? So they come to this moment, and we'll keep reading here. So Abram said to Lot, please, let's not have quarreling between you and me, or between your herdsmen and my herdsmen, since we are relatives. Isn't the whole land before you? Separate from me. If you go to the left, I will go to the right. If you go to the right, I will go to the left. Lot looked out and he saw that the entire plain of the Jordan, as far as the Zor, was well watered everywhere, like the Lord's garden and the land of Egypt. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose the entire plain of the Jordan for himself. I want to talk about the disordered love of Lot, okay? Abram puts the choice before Lot, which we're going to talk about because that's actually pretty nuts. But Lot lifts up his eyes, it says, and he clearly identifies the better choice. He identifies the land that's actually going to give him the biggest financial benefit. He's ambitious, right? What does he see? He sees financial opportunities. So what we're going to see with Lot is he puts his money first, okay? And we learn that it's bigger to him than even the plan of God. Even the plan of God. Now, admittedly, God's plan here looks pretty silly. Because he told Abraham, I'm going to take you from civilization and I'm going to bring you to a primitive place. And I want you to remain there until you are blessed. And that's where he's been, right? So this looks pretty silly. So Lot comes to Abram and he says, hey, Uncle Abe, business is business. So I'm going to depart, right? Because I know we're supposed to be here for God's plan, but it's all about the Benjamins, AB. Copyright Josh Lloyd, 2024. Is it wrong in and of itself to want money? The answer is no. You need to hear that. It's really important you see the distinction here. It's no. Abram is wealthy, Lot is wealthy, but what they do with their money is radically different here. And verse 10 tells us there's something going on with Lot here that is unique. Robert Alter, he's a leading expert in ancient Hebrew narrative. He teaches at Berkeley. He's been there since the 60s. And what he says is when we read verse 10, it is not a description of the Jordan plain in the voice of the narrator, but it is instead when it says, Lot lifted up his eyes and he looked. What we're getting is the interpretation from the point of view of Lot. We actually get his heart's perspective here. And what does it say? Lot looked up and he saw the whole plain of the Jordan was well watered, like the garden of the Lord. Now, Alter will say that's not just a little brushstroke of the author, but it's actually something in his eyes. It's something spiritual that's going on here for Lot. When he looks up, he says, finally, it's like the garden of the Lord. What he's saying in a sense is, it looked like heaven. Because what is the garden of the Lord? It's where this whole story began. We started there not long ago. In the garden of the Lord, that's where we were satisfied. It's where we walked with God, with nothing in between, which means in the garden, we were perfectly fulfilled because we were created for the presence of God and the love of God. So in that space, we've actually never known this space yet of the direct presence of God. Even here, now, we all have places in our lives that we feel insecure, we feel unfulfilled. We're just waiting to break through to get to that thing. And that's what happens here, is that Lot so identifies his own desire as heaven that he looks up and says, that is the garden of the Lord. And what was that thing? It was the financial opportunity that he saw. Now, what's going on with Lot here? It's incredibly human. It's actually incredibly human. Romans will say that this is actually a condition of every human heart. Paul says it this way in Romans, that we were designed to serve the Creator God, but instead they worshiped created things. And so this is what every human heart is prone to find something here and say that is the garden of the Lord, and to chase after it. And that can be career, that can be financial opportunity like that. That can be a person or romance. That can be so many things for us here, but that's what's happening. And C.S. Lewis will go on to say, you'll see this with Lot. First of all, Lot wanted the gifts above God. And that's what's really ironic here, is that Lot wanted the garden without God, because he's going to have to leave Canaan in the presence of God to go get it. C.S. Lewis will say, the nature of what's wrong inside of us, of the thing that needs healing, of the wound in us all, is actually disordered love, which means love is out of order. It means the things that we love in life, which should be first, are fourth or fifth or third. And the things that are fourth or fifth should be number one. He'll say that it's disordered love. And we learn that in this passage. I want to give an example of this. I feel like wealth is maybe not a great example because we're such a young church, right? We just had like Baby Town up here, right? Like we are such a young church. I feel like most of Reach doesn't even have babies yet, right? So talking about wealth, you're like, wealth, what's that? Right, except that we're in Kirkland right now, so I don't know how you got here, but it might be wealth or debt, right? Probably the honest answer, okay? But romance is a great example of this, okay? Romance, when you look at a person and you say this person, because I can even relate to this, because when I met my wife, Kendall, I thought, that looks like the garden of the Lord. I mean, I didn't think that, but I thought something very analogous to that. And we're very prone to do this. Now, I'm a counselor now, or I'm a therapist. Most of the counseling I do is marriage therapy, and it's very hard. Marriage counseling is very hard because marriage is hard. And it's wonderful. But when I get fatigued with marriage counseling, do you know what I do? I just take on more premarital counseling. Because premarital counseling is like the sweetest thing ever. They have no idea how bad it's going to be. It's just adorable. Like I will lead them in talking about conflict and how they show up in conflict and what it's going to be like when you do have frustrations with each other, the other person, and you can see the literal gloss just come over their eyes as I'm describing what life might be like. It's so cute. But that was my story. That was me and my wife, right? We looked at each other, and I think we both thought on some level, this will banish the insecurity that I feel inside of me. This will fulfill me. This will take away this thing. You are going to fulfill and satisfy me in a way that I never have been before. And if that's your understanding of marriage, as it is for so many of us, that dream actually has to die. And so when I do marriage counseling, which is very hard, a lot of marriages, do not survive the death of that dream. Because it's very painful when you start to come and realize how the person you married is a sinner. They're imperfect. They cannot fulfill you. They cannot be sinless for you. They can't do that for you. And when that dream dies, many marriages don't make it because it's very painful. But even as a marriage, I sometimes am secretly celebrating when it is dying because that's my story, but also when that dream dies, that person gets to become not a God, but a person again. That all the hopes you put on them, it can actually be rested somewhere else, and they again are allowed to be a husband or a wife who's imperfect. But all of us. So Lot is just an example. Lot's just an example of this. Romance is an example of this. And what the Bible will say is if you do that, if you put in order of first importance something above God and you pursue that, you will learn how fragile that thing is. That's what the Bible says, that those things will crush you because they cannot bear the weight of your heart's hopes or desires because you weren't made for that. They shouldn't be of first importance. So that's what Lot does. And I don't get to trace in this sermon where Lot's life goes as he puts his heart in something as fickle as money. But you'll see, and you can see even now how fragile it is. Right? In his herdsmen and how like the frustration. No, don't tread on my land. Don't tread on my investment. Don't tread on my financial growth. You can see how fragile it is already with the conflict that they have. But this is Lot's choice. And this is what happens. If we read on, that's what happens. Then Lot journeyed eastward and they separated from each other. Abram lived in the land of Canaan where God told him, but Lot lived in the cities on the plain and set up his tent near Sodom. Now the men of Sodom were evil, sinning immensely against the Lord. And we're going to see how that goes. That's a foretelling. Now we've looked at, this is the disordered love of Lot, money first above God. All right, now we're going to look at the well-ordered love of Abram. Okay, let's go to verse 14. After Lot had separated from him, the Lord said to Abram, look from the place where you are. Look north and south and east and west, for I will give you and your offspring forever all the land that you see. I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth, so that if anyone could count the dust of the earth, then your offspring could be counted. Get up and walk around the land through its length and width, for I will give it to you. So Abram moved his tent and went to live near the oaks of Mamre at Hebron, where he built an altar to the Lord and worships. Now Abram's ambition is totally different than Lot, totally different. Now what Abram did here was wild, because he lives in a patriarchal society that says that seniority is everything. And Abram is actually the leader of the clan. This is his clan, and his nephew Lot is with him. He has all the power. But instead, he puts this choice before Lot and says, you choose. It's actually a wild thing. I imagine anyone looking on this was like, excuse me, what's happening? It was wild. But we see through this passage the priorities of Abram, because he had three things, okay? He had a relationship with Lot, which we see is right now being tested. There's anger, there's conflict. 2, he had a relationship with God. That's very new, okay? That God has called him and God has made these promises and shown himself to him. And 3, he had a relationship with money, specifically a growing relationship with his finances. We learn really quick what the order is, and I'll tell you how. One is, just look at the options that he had. Option 1, he could have just stayed where he was with Lot. Stayed right here. But what do we know is gonna happen? Just more conflict, right? It would hurt his relationship with Lot. So that was option 1. He didn't choose that. The lack of space was causing anger, right? Option 2, Abram could have just claimed seniority. I'm the senior one here. You're going to stay here in Canaan, but I'm going to go take the fertile land of the Jordan. Yeah, that does look nice. That's how we're going to do things. That would have been very normal. But what would the cost have been? He would have disobeyed God. He would have left the place that God told him to remain. So he chose option 3, which is that he gave the choice to Lot, which preserves his relationship with Lot, and he continues to stay. But what was the cost? The cost was he put himself in financial jeopardy. Do you see how clear it is? Like, he loved God first. He loved the other, his neighbor, Lot, second. And only third came money, not before the other two. When commentators look at this, they'll say this about Abram. They'll say, he lived by faith, not by sight. That's what it'll say in Hebrews. And when Hebrews goes on to define what is faith, what does that mean? What's the word faith mean? It'll say in verse 1, now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. You see, Lot sees. Lot looks up and he's like, wow, look at that. But Abram, what does he do? He doesn't look, he remembers. He remembers what God said. And it gives him staying power to be right here, even though it's going to mean a cost for him. It's really different, right? I hope that's what we're doing here. We're in church. I have this childish thing that comes up in me sometimes when I'm at church where I'm like, why are we here? Like just an honest question, like, what are we doing here? And I hope this is it, right? Like there's so much in our rhythms outside of this Sunday morning in our world that's just promising. It's just promising this will be the thing that gives you fulfillment. That tax bracket, that person, that achievement, this thing with career, that will give you full. There's actually a lot that looks really good out there, right? These are the messages, but that's the sight. But here, I hope what we're doing constantly is just coming back and saying, but what does God say, right? Not by sight, but by faith. What does God say is true about us? That's what Abram did. He says, I'm going to stay because the blessing will be better. Because God said this, I remember. Okay. So now Abram kind of looks like a hero here. He looks great, right? I just kind of said it. He has the well-ordered love of Abram. But he has such a fragile faith, super fragile faith. Okay. Like come back to the beginning of the passage, come back to verse 2. Abram was very rich in livestock, silver and gold. He went by stages from the Negev to Bethel, to the place between Bethel and Ai, where his tent had formerly been, to the site where he had built the altar. And Abram called on the name of the Lord. Do you know what the significance of that is? That is a pilgrimage of repentance. Because what happened last chapter is that God called Abram and he said, right here is where the blessing will be, this land. And the next verse, Abram departs because there's a famine in the land and he immediately abandons God in the promise and goes to Egypt. The next verse. And this is what it's like to be a Christian. It's to say, I trust you, God. I'm with you. I'm here. And then to find that you have wandered. To find that your love has again gotten out of order or that you've been living by sight. And therefore, to be a Christian is also to come back and say, I have been wandering. This thing has gotten first. But now I'm back, God. Now I'm back and I want to worship you. That's what it is to be a Christian. Abram has this incredibly fragile faith. By the way, this is the beginning, right? Abram's life, I get this little chapter and it's like, there is a lot that goes on, okay? Like that whole thing that happened last chapter where he pimped out his wife, that's gonna happen again over here. So He's not like this glorious hero, right? He's actually, this is this guy that you're like, why is God even dealing with this guy, right? Because the real hidden story here is that God is faithful, is that God's promise remains. You can tell it's not a conditional promise because if it was conditional, it would have elapsed the next verse, right? But God's still here. And he actually, what does he do with Abram here? He redeclares the promise. Look, I'm going to give you it all, this whole place. I'm going to bless your family. I'm going to bless the whole world through you. He restates the promise. It's just showing that God is faithful and he can even handle Abram's fragile faith. And I love that. I love that so much. There's this portion here that I'm not going to read because I read it 3 times and I thought either my brain is broken or that passage does not make sense. I did read it and make sense of it eventually, but it's very hard, right? It's tough sledding. So we're not going to do it because there's quite a bit that happens here, but I want to summarize it for you. And it's in Genesis 14, 1 through 10, where there's a list of kings. There's specifically 9 kings. Some people in the preaching staff said their names sound like Pokemon. I choose you, Chedorolomander. And there's this battle, okay, in the place where Lot is living, okay? 4 kings rise up against 5 other kings, and we don't get a scope of how big this is, but can you imagine the collateral damage of 9 kings waging a war in a single location? It's probably a lot. You know what that's not good for? Financial investment, land investment, right? This neighborhood has great ranch-style homes, wonderful schools close by, but occasionally 9 kings converge in war at this location. Not great, right? And it doesn't go so great for Lot for that reason. In 14:11, it says, the 4 kings took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah. The 4 kings rise up, they take the 5 kings, they win. And they took all the goods of them and all their food, and they went on. They also took Abram's nephew Lot and his possessions, for he was living near Sodom, and they went on. Now, up until now, I think we can agree that Lot's probably really succeeded. Do you remember why he chose the land? Right? It's all about the Benjamins, Abi. He took the land because it had financial opportunities. So he's been probably killing it until this point, right up until he loses it all. Right? Very similarly to the people that we were talking about in 2008, who had all of their ducks maybe, or maybe they had all of their loves, their ordered love, right, in these things, and then lost it completely, and it caused them to what? I think this is what we can reasonably predict here. What is it like when somebody who loves money maybe first, this is the thing that I live for, when they lose it all? What happens to that person? Likely complete emotional devastation, likely an existential crisis, which I think we can predict probably happened for Lot here as he loses everything. What's the result of his disordered love? I think it just shows, right, what I said. If you put your love, if I put my love in something as fickle as money or something here, that you can lose it in a second. Now Abram chooses God, and what's God's response? He restates the promise. We just see that. What's the result of Abram's well-ordered love? He has that staying power. He's free from that fear. He already said no to money. It shows the peace that he has with money. Now, what he does next, what Abram will do next, actually shows once again, yeah, money is not first for him. It's not the thing that he'll protect at all costs. And it's a pretty amazing story, because this is not miraculously where Lot's story ends. If we go to 14:14, when Abram heard that his relative had been taken prisoner, he assembled his 318 trained men born in his household, and they went in pursuit as far as Dan. And he and his servants deployed against them by night, defeated them, and pursued them as far as Hobah to the north of Damascus. He brought back all the goods, and also his relative Lot and all his goods, as well as the women and the other people. So Abram is able to muster an army. This is actually, commentators will say, this is actually a moment that displays how wealthy Abram was. Okay, so again, it's not bad to have financial gain, but what does he do with his wealth? He takes the greatest risk. He takes his whole household, all the men, and goes to war. He actually goes after the 4 kings that just defeated 5 kings in order to rescue who? Someone that he loves, right? Well-ordered love. We see it again. We see that he's willing to risk it all for something that's so much better, something in the right order, right? He's not afraid to risk it, and he wins. And I don't have time to say how crazy that is, but that is quite an accomplishment, that he defeated these kings. Now, I just want to help us finish with this, okay? This is the passage. This is what happened. I want to help us look inward, okay? I want to help us look at ourselves, right? The order of our own loves, the reordering of our own loves. And I want to leave you with just these questions. Where, like Abram, do I need to come back to God and say, I've wandered. I have a fragile faith. I want to come. Maybe it's not even I'm back. It's like I want to come back. Where do I sense that my loves and priorities may need to be reordered? In fact, what can I even just be curious about? Maybe even just like, what is one thing that drives me that is maybe in contention with that first place spot, with God's spot? What is that one thing that I know is really important to me? That would be so good to name. That would be worth naming, right? Can I just share with you an area of my life that God is slowly bringing back into order that I don't want to share with you? When I was preparing to talk about this message, I didn't necessarily want to talk about money. I definitely didn't want to talk about the emotional struggles that I've had with money. So here we go. As I was studying this passage, I was thinking about this phrase of living by faith, not by sight. And I was thinking, where in someone's life is it just so obvious that they are living by faith and not by sight? And I think generosity is clearly one of them, right? When someone gives of their resources in love to somebody else, that's bonkers to me, right? That is not how I was taught by the world. That is not my natural inclination. Generosity, it kind of blows me away. Even when people have been generous to me, which has happened a lot, they've been generous towards me, I am bewildered by it. Why would you do this? Like, why? I often ask that question because it's an honest question. And they'll say things like, oh, because it's just money. Or, oh, it's our joy to that. We love doing that. Or, oh, it belonged to God anyway. Right? Well-ordered love. Can I share with you, can I confess, it just took me so many years to believe that I could trust God with something like money. I grew up in a house, we had big financial turns, big ones. We moved multiple times, and when we moved, it was because of finances. And it happened quick. And I would lose all my friends. And we would move to a different state. That was almost a normal experience in my household. My sister also had some significant struggles after one of these moves. And in her teen years, she's almost my age, that included an addiction to meth for some time, and almost her death multiple times. And if you know anything about addiction to meth and the recovery rates, it's a miracle that she is alive today, let alone really successful and wonderful today and free. And my dad was let go of by his employer, which was the church, who said that he couldn't manage his household. And so he was let go. And my sister needed treatment. And if you know anything about inpatient treatment, it's incredibly expensive. And so Rachel went to treatment. In fact, we all went to treatment with her. I wonder if you can imagine what kind of emotional energy surrounded the topic of money for me growing up. How did I emerge into adulthood feeling about money? Money scared me. It terrified me. It was a source of stress, of lack, of resentment, of unpredictability, of something that could take everything in a heartbeat. And because of that, it has taken a long, slow convincing. God's done this in so many areas of my life, where he slowly convinced me that I can trust him through one action at a time. I was in a men's group here on Sundays called, it's Don't Stop Growing Now, but it's a group that has a lot of reflection in it. And I was in therapy, and one of the questions that was asked in that group was, where in your life do you feel helpless? And I remember thinking, and I literally thought, and I wrote down like, nowhere. Right? I was like, nowhere, no. But that process had taught me to stop and pause and reflect, and so I did. And then when I did that, I found myself all of a sudden writing down things. And in that list, money was in there, and that surprised me. Money. But then it didn't surprise me. Because when I looked at my life, if there was a financial turn, if there was a curveball, if something happened that was unpredictable, if my car broke down or had a repair, if a medical bill came in that I didn't know, I could have big emotional reactions. I could be up at night thinking about it, not sleeping. Like so many of us, my story had informed my fears. My story had informed my worship, the things that meant the most to me, that I prioritized the most, that I was scared of even the most. That's so many of us. But can you imagine what it's like now? Because God has slowly convinced my heart that every time I choose to be generous, every time I choose to give to someone who's maybe experiencing that same stress and anxiety, every time I choose to give to the church, which has had harm in my past, but also is here and doing good work. Every time I do that, it's reminding my heart what's first and what's not first. Every time I do it, it's actually releasing my heart from believing that that's something that is of first importance, that's the love, the thing I need to protect the most. And P.S., the point here is not that you should give money to Reach Church. That is not my application. You're never going to hear that be like the point of something at Reach Church. But if there's any place in your life that you're feeling scared or stuck or resistant to the Spirit of God or feeling shame or feeling not Christian, which is what I felt when it took me almost half of my life to begin to be able to give in those ways, I will always invite you to be curious. I just wonder, and I wonder I wonder about you right now, like you're sitting in this seat, just what has been prompted in you? What feels numb? What feels resistant? Just how do you feel? Because when you know Jesus, you have the freedom to be curious, right? There's no longer any spirit of condemnation for you. You're not condemned. We just celebrated this a couple weeks ago. The cross really happened. The resurrection happened. Now you have the freedom to grow because you're already forgiven if you trust in Christ. So now in your seat, when you're in these places, I just invite you, to be curious. What is that? Do I have something there? Why do I do that? Where do I feel emotion or anger or fear? And I want to just give you 60 seconds of silence to finish. Okay, this will be the last thing. But with these questions, just to prompt your heart to maybe be curious where you're sitting. Where, like Abram, do I need to come back to God and say, I've wandered, I have a fragile faith, I have a fickle heart, but I want to come back? Where do I sense that I have a love or priority that needs to be reordered where God is first? Or just even what's coming up for me as I sit in here this morning? I want to give you 60 seconds to do that. I promise I will do it too. Jesus, will you remind us of your kindness, that you look with compassion on us, that you are faithful, that you have unconditional promises that stand even when we, like Abram, have to say, I wandered, or my love it's gotten out of order, I've drifted, and I want to come back. Will you continue to prompt us? If we've named something, will you help us to name it, to just say it, that could be the beginning of you, Spirit, doing just new work in us. You never stop working.